was really impressed in my group the other night because someone said something, and I keep repeating it to everybody that I've been meeting with this week, and that is more conversation about boundaries. And it's so important to think about boundaries in a way that actually supports you, supports your growth, supports how you feel about things, supports your viewpoint. And one of the things that this person said was that boundaries are always perceived as a way to keep people out, like a gate to a house. But actually, boundaries are the recipe and the cue to help people come in. And so when we create boundaries, we're actually creating ways for ourselves to be safe so that we can actually be in relationships in the ways that make us feel comfortable. So if someone respects our boundaries, they get to learn about us. If they get to know our boundaries, they get to understand where we're coming from and how to operate and interact with us. So as I might have mentioned to you before, I remember when I was working in one of my very first internships, and everyone, had very loose boundaries there. People were talking about their personal lives and doing case consultation, and some people were well-trained, some people less so, some people disagreed with each other's approach. And there was lots of talking all the time, lots of talking and not really being respectful, or even it was my first experience with working with professional therapists. So I thought, oh, everybody's just going to know how to communicate and have really good boundaries. But I remember, since I was really learning to have better boundaries in my life, whenever I had a boundary, like I, can't talk right now, I would say it in such a rigid way and such a guarded way with like all my armor on. And I think when you're starting to learn to have boundaries, that's a lot of how people might experience us. And so it might be perceived that we actually are using boundaries and they are keeping people out. But if you can set the boundary, and if people are more curious about your boundaries, and you set that with a kind tone and you watch how you say things, and you use I statements and active listening and reflecting back, then people get to learn about you in your boundaries. I think there's nothing better sometimes to actually know where people are at, and then instead of having to guess, like walking on eggshells, and what am I going to step on? What landmine am I going to step on? So getting to actually be with someone who's really clear about what they need and want is like, to me, it's like magic. It's like a magic recipe for connection, now that I think about it. So I want you to see if you can rework your boundary thoughts as like coping skills that you need, protective measures, a way to explain who you are. And then I also think it's, if you can't be flexible on something, that you explain a little bit why. I'll give you an example of someone who had a boundary with me, and I felt, oh, I feel okay about that boundary, because they said it in all I statements about them, not that I was doing anything wrong, because they were sort of teaching me what they needed to do to be able to come to an event that I was on, and be with them, during that time. So it was more of I need a little bit of time for myself if I'm going to be spending that much time with you. So I'm going to need to take a break. I'm going to need to sit and rest for a minute and look at my emails and, call a few people. So I'm going to need some space. And that was so encouraging to hear, because then I also felt like there wasn't a lot of demands on my time, that I actually could rely on them to take a time out of like creating a busy schedule with us. And then we decided together like how much activities we were going to do. So boundaries are this like little view window in to somebody, but also it can be expanded on, because you can also talk about what you need. So it's like an opening conversation piece, I think. So boundaries, it's the way in, it's the way to learn about someone. It's not about keeping people out. So thought I'd give you those words of wisdom that come from my group. So many words of wisdoms come from this groups that I lead.